Friends, today is Sunday, the 26th of July. We're back in my study, as you can see. I want to say just a few words today about the first reading from today's Mass, from the first book of Kings, a reading about King Solomon. King Solomon. Solomon was the son of David, King David, and his wife Bathsheba. And the question that arises in the reading today for Solomon and for us too is, what is it you want? What do you want? Solomon was a young man at the time. He has just assumed the throne of King David. Big shoes to step into. Had just become king and no doubt was filled with all the insecurities that one would have in assuming this great authority and responsibility. And again, as I say, following after Israel's greatest king, David. In the midst of this, God appears to him in a dream. And says, "Ask something of me, and I will give it to you. Ask something of me, and I will give it to you." What will he ask for? What would you ask for? What would you ask for? Knowing, of course, that however one responds gives us a pretty good insight into the state of the soul of that person. Think of a familiar question to other individuals in the scriptures, those who have been approached by God or others with an important question about what do you want? What would you like? Think of, for example, Elisha and the prophet Elijah. Elisha was the successor of Elijah. And as Elijah is being carried into heaven in that fiery chariot, Elisha was asked what he wants, and Elisha said, "A double portion of your spirit." A double portion of your spirit, of the great spirit of Elijah, who accomplished so many great things. And Elisha, wanting to follow in the footsteps of his master, asked for a double portion. Or think of the disciples of St. John the Baptist coming to Jesus, the very beginning of the Gospel of John, that transition between John the Baptist and Jesus. And the disciples come to Jesus, and Jesus asks them the question, "What are you looking for? What are you looking for?" And they respond with a kind of cryptic response, and they say, "Lord, where are you staying?" Better translation of that word staying is remain. Where do you remain? A very important word in the Gospel of John. Where do you remain? And Jesus says to them, "Come and see. Come and see." And they do. And they remain with him. Or think of the blind beggar, Bartimaeus, nice alliteration, blind beggar, Bartimaeus. And Jesus says to Bartimaeus, "What do you want? What is it that you want?" And of course, in one sense, it's probably clear what he would want, but Jesus, out of respect for him, lets him respond. "What is it, Bartimaeus, that you want?" And Bartimaeus responds, "That I see, that I see." That word "see" with every level of its meaning. And there's a story, too, of St. Thomas Aquinas. St. Thomas Aquinas. And the story, whether it's true or not, it's a good story, but the story is that Thomas was in the chapel praying, and the sacristan of the chapel was kind of hiding behind a pillar, observing Thomas at prayer. And what he observes, Thomas is in front of a crucifix. The sacristan observes the crucifix speaking to Thomas, saying to Thomas, "You have written well of me, Thomas. You have written well of me, Thomas. what reward will you receive from me for your labor? What reward? And the response of St. Thomas, who wasted no words here, in the Latin said, Domine non nisi te. What is your reward? What do you wish for your reward? And Thomas's response, Domine non nisi te, and that is, Lord, nothing except you. Nothing except you. A wonderful response to the words of the Lord, asking him. And so, what about us? What about us? The Lord asks us, what is it that you want? Take a look at Solomon again. Solomon says, give your servant an understanding heart to judge your people. Give your servant an understanding heart to judge your people and to distinguish right from wrong. Solomon's response, please God, and God says, because you have asked for this, not for a long life for yourself, not for riches, not for the life of your enemies, but for understanding so that you may know what is right. I do as you request. I do as you request. And because of Solomon's response, his whole life and all his works would be seen from the standpoint of God. It's as if as in St. Paul, where St. Paul tells us to put on the mind of Christ. Solomon put on the mind of God. All that he did was as if through the eyes and ears and mouth of God, aligning himself perfectly with God's will. And thus, what that meant, of course, in the real world was that should he achieve riches, it will only be used for good. Should he achieve power, it would only be used for the good. Should he achieve great pleasures, it would only be used for the good. And the point being, with wisdom, wealth and power and pleasure will always be used for the good. Wealth and power and pleasure, always used for the good. Think of those things. Think of the great figures through history who have fallen because of power, riches, and pleasure. As good as those things can be, they're also deadly and can be misused. Wealth, power, pleasure. But for Solomon, used for the good. And he thus, through all these centuries, remembered as one who was wise. But back again to the question, for yourself, Solomon has answered, what about you? What do you want? What is it that you want? Ask something of me, and I will give it to you. What will it be? Well, I'm going to give you a suggestion. In case the day comes that that question is posed to you, and you're caught short, you don't know what to say, let me give you a response, and it's a simple one. Ask something of me, and I will give it. And the answer, faith, hope, and love. Faith, hope, and love. The theological virtues. Those virtues that we cannot acquire with our own power, but are only given to us as gift. Faith, hope, and love. The virtues. The very life of God within you. To put on the mind of Christ. To put on the mind of God. To always do his will. Your will, Lord, and not my own. Hold that thought, and we'll see you tomorrow.